this Friday. I get some phone calls asking me about some of our presentations, and I won't say they're done randomly, but each week something new comes up.
And we try to stay au courant.
Yeah, we want to be relevant to the situation. But today, I'm opening up with antiquities. I thought it'd be nice if those of us who belong to the Antiochian Church would like to hear a little bit about patriarchs that I had the opportunity to meet during the years of my public ministry. Now, the first one I did not actually meet. I caught the tail end of his patriarchy, and that is Alexander. He was a petite sort of a fella, but he was an absolute genius. He knew multiple languages, and it was to his credit that he opened up the Belaman Theological Seminary of St. John in Damascus.
And his seat is in Damascus. His seat was in Damascus.
Right. Because at one time the Church of Antioch had its cathedral in Antioch itself.
Yeah, I thought we needed a little background.
You know, the great city of God. And through the vicissitudes of history, calamities and other events like giant earthquakes that took the lives of 5,000 people, and the various overlords, the Patriarchate was moved to Damascus on the city called Strait that St. Paul walked on. But in the altar itself are the tiles from the original Antiochian cathedral called the Maria Migi, which is called the Cathedral of Our Lady. And hence there's a lot of blue. And it's a beautiful, beautiful church that seats hundreds. And that's where the patriarch has his seat. And built around it is his residence and his receiving hall and the kitchen, which could be outdoors or indoors, depending.
Just a question. You were mentioning about his residence. Did you find in the patriarchs that you met that they lived very much as the common people do, as opposed to the bishops in this country, the archbishops in this country who do live kind of opulently? We put it on them, we help them do that, but did you find that they lived very simply?
Absolutely. I'll tell you a story.
Okay, that's what I'm
later on
to hear.
When I describe Patriarch Ignatius. In any case, Patriarch Alexander, there was a time that there was two patriarchs at the same time. Arsenios, Haddad, and Alexander. And it's a whole situation doesn't need discussing. It was after Pope Gregory, Patriarch Gregory Haddad had died. In case you think I'm wandering, I'm not. Things pop into my head. Pope Gregory, Patriarch Gregory, was known for his saintliness, Gregory Haddad, who followed Meletius Dumani, who was the first Antiochian Patriarchate in several hundred years.
What years are we talking about now?
Well, Dumani was elected in 1899, and he died in the early part of the 20th century, at which time Gregory Haddad was elected. And during the early 20th century, there was a great famine in the city of Damascus. And Gregory Haddad had ordered all of the opulent chalices and jewelry and whatever there was, because Russia, which was a protector of our patriarchate, would lavish gold chalices and crosses and all kinds of very beautiful pieces of art and censers and patens and so forth. He had them all sold, and the money was to feed whoever came to the door of the patriarchate. And one very touching story about him was he heard about a Muslim woman that had knocked on the door of the patriarchate asking for bread, and the nun refused to give it to her because she was Muslim. So the patriarch heard about it, and he called that nun to see him and to bring him a loaf of bread. So she, very with trepidation, came forward and showed him a loaf of bread. And he looked at her and he said, "Sister," in Arabic would be Haji, "Sister, is there any religion written on this bread?" She said, "No, master, no, master." He said, "You feed whoever comes to this door, regardless of their religion." And there's a saying that when he died, the Muslims cried out, "Allahu Akbar, Gregorius Haddad Rasulallah." Gregory the Great is his prophet, is his disciple. He was loved by everyone in the city of Damascus for his humanitarian heart. And he left a great legacy when he died. He was a great churchman. And there's a great deal of literature written about him. And he was succeeded by Alexander III. And at that time, there was, I said, two patriarchs were elected. One pro-Greek and the other one pro-Arab. And because of the Greek influence in our patriarchate, for one thing. In any case, when Dad died, Alexander was pronounced the Patriarch of Antioch with no contenders. And he was renowned for his learning and in his reopening the Belaman. And he had been to Russia and Greece. He studied at the great theological schools in the Orthodox world, and was fluent in multiple languages. He too was very petite, by the way.
Speaking of petite, can I tell my little story?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll get to it though, I promise.
No, you will. All women do get to say their say.
Okay.
In any case, Metropolitan Philip was his student. And if you walked into the office of the late Metropolitan Philip or Bishop Antony, you saw a portrait of Alexander next to their desk. He had such a profound influence on Metropolitan Philip. And he gave him the okay to go study at Kelham College in England. And one thing that he heard before he died, those of us that were in the Eastern region, for the first time recorded in Orthodox liturgy on records that were 33 and a third, I guess.
Remember those?
Remember those big records? And Metropolitan Antony Bashir was so excited to take him a copy of those records and play it during the Holy Synod meeting. And it is said that the Patriarch leaped and said, "My dream is coming true, that America is Antiochian because of Antony Bashir." And he was so overwhelmed to listen to the choirs. He too, again, as I said, was quite petite, but he had a strong personality. And he renovated the Patriarchate itself. He was one of the great patriarchs of the 20th century. He was succeeded by Theodosius Bergeli, who had been the Archbishop of Tripoli. Prior to that, Theodosius Bergeli was the Archbishop in Tyre and Sidon, and he's one of the few examples of an Archbishop who was transferred from his anointed see to another see, which was Tripoli. He was a great diplomat. He spoke Turkish fluently, Russian, Greek, of course Arabic, English. He was the man that came to the United States with Antony Bashir and traveled the land in order to select our successor to the late Victor Abu Asali, who was for a short period of time was the first Antiochian Archbishop appointed by the Holy Synod and approved by Patriarch Gregory. Victor Abu Asali was our bishop for a term, and he resided in Worcester, Mass, and traveled the country like all the others. And when he died, Patriarch Theodosius felt in order to elect a proper successor, he would come with then Archbishop Antony Bashir and call the country as to see who would be the legitimate canonical successor to the late Victor Abu Asali. And of course, the lot finally fell to Antony Bashir. But the Patriarch Theodosius presided over that election in America. I met him when I was in Damascus, and there were some very funny stories, some of which I cannot repeat to the public because of my Arabic and things that I said in Arabic. But he was known to be very prayerful. We would see him on the balcony with Father Elias Shalhut's brother, Archmandrit Shalhut. He would be standing on the balcony and he would be chanting the hymn to the Virgin Mary that we sing during Great Lent, Inni Ana Abduki. And you could hear his very thin voice go, Inni Ana Abduki, like that. And but he knew America, which was, we spoke to him in English and some Arabic. And we did have one priest with us who was rather dark-skinned. And he took us aside and he asked us if that priest was from the Sudan. And we all busted up laughing, because no, he was born in America like all of us. He lived a long time, and for some time he was in the hospital in Beirut at St. George Hospital. But he was the one that presided over the consecration of Metropolitan Philip. No one will ever know. And if you want, you go back to the Word magazine in 1966, the August or September issue. I wrote a complete account of that period. And Patriarch Theodosius stood up against the Russians for Tripoli and for North America. I hope I'm not confusing you. In Damascus at the time, there was a great deal of, the Russians always had a big interest in the Middle East, but they wanted to divide America, have a bishop in Los Angeles and so forth. Plus, they were pushing for a candidate to be elected in Tripoli that was vacant because of the Patriarch. And he was very pro-Russian, having lived in Russia as one of our legates. And Theodosius did not trust that. And Time magazine did a whole article on how Metropolitan Antony and the Patriarch fought the Russians during the Cold War period. And that was the same thing that happened during the time of Philip Saliba, where they were trying to divide America, influence America by having spheres of influence through our bishops. And Theodosius, as an aged man, and I must say he was a tired man, he fought them. Philip Saliba was not on their top list for the candidacy in North America. But we had a delegation that went. Father Ruffin, myself, Father Joe Shaheen, Father George Radis, Father George Corey, etc. The whole bunch of us went to Damascus, went to Beirut, went everywhere to plead the case of the election that took place, the nomination that took place in North America, in which Metropolitan Philip, or Father Philip at the time, received 354.5 votes, the largest number of votes at our nominating meeting that year in February in New York City. And basically they tried to overturn the nomination, and we had Russian bishops influenced by Russia. So the synod was divided. You cannot imagine during that period, and we would meet almost every day when we were in Damascus to meet with the Patriarch. And how did we meet him? A man would come with a big stick and announce, boom, boom, boom. His Beatitude, Patriarch Theodosius VI. Everybody was stood at attention, and the patriarch would come in, so humble, and we would sit and talk with him, and tell him how important this election was for our archdiocese and for the Orthodox world. This election was the most historic election in a century. It would determine the course of the Patriarchate in North America for years to come. And Patriarch Theodosius stood firm. And after the election, he expelled all the Russian representatives from the Patriarchate, because they would be handing out money, called simony, handing out money to elect counter candidates to our preferred candidate, who was Metropolitan Philip. And that same thing happened in Tripoli, where our beloved Elias Kurban was elected to go to Tripoli. And when he went into Tripoli, they lined the streets from Beirut to Tripoli, throwing palms, singing the hymns of Palm Sunday, Hosanna in the highest. He was greeted by the throngs, because there too, they wanted to have a bishop who was close to the Russians, and they would have some impact on the decisions of the Holy Synod. And that was another historic moment. But all of that period of the 60s, he died, and he was succeeded by Theodosius, who was, I call, like a prophet. A long beard, he smoked incessantly, he had a few choice words in his vocabulary. He was famous in his strength, for going to a burning school, St. Panalena school, that was on fire. And he went up to in his diocese, he went up to the school and pulled the wall down with his bare hands. We know the windows had bars. He pulled it down, and he saved all those students from certain death, caught in that little small classroom. The first patriarch to go to the Arab world and tell the people of Saudi Arabia, we were here before anyone else, that we are the authentic people in the Arab world. He also, when he was a young bishop, used to play soccer so he could reach out to the youth, where he was a bishop in South America. He was an extraordinarily literate man. He knew Kazantzakis. He knew all the Greek literature. He had a fiery personality. And he was the first patriarch to come to North America on a full pastoral visit. Now tell your story.
Oh, when he was petite. It's just a little anecdote, but I'm 5 feet 10 inches tall, and I think that, if memory serves me correctly, he was barely 5 feet tall. And I was so humbled, and I was so in awe that I was going to meet this holy man, about whom I had heard so much, and about history had fed my spirituality, and I was looking forward so much to see and to hear words of wisdom from him. And I was introduced to him, and he had to lean forward to look up at me, and I will translate afterwards, and he said, "Oui, vous jouez au basketball?" The first words I heard from this man's mouth were, "Do you play basketball?" I was looking for something to feed my soul. Anyway, it was very funny, and it was something I'll always remember. At 5'10", I guess I did kind of tower over the man, but I was looking for something completely different from that story. Ignatius IV, I had the...
Wait till I get to him.
Oh, sorry.
Don't jump.
Sorry.
Oof, my wife is jumping. I hope I'm not boring you all, because the time is coming.
Well, okay. Continue.
He died very suddenly. We were in Damascus, and he led a very untimely death. Maybe we'll talk about that more later. Should I cut this now and then continue in another session?
Yeah.
Let me cut it now, and we'll come back, because I've been yakking quite a while. Thank you for listening. It's our Antiochian history.